Nightmare World. Never heard of it. But according to its description, it's a horror anthology. And I love horror anthologies. The nice thing about horror anthologies is... Here's the problem with horror movies or horror books. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not good. But with a horror anthology, there's usually a story or two in them that are really good. So you go to the movies and you see a horror anthology. At the very least, you're usually guaranteed at least one of the stories being good. There are some exceptions, but I also like the format. Horror lends itself really well to the short story format. That's why you'll notice a lot of, for instance, there was a movie in the theaters just recently, not Don't Breathe, Lights Out, Lights Out. That was based on I didn't see it, but it was based on a short film that was only about 4 minutes long. And it's a really cool short film. I think it's available online somewhere. I'd recommend watching it. It's only 4 minutes. It's actually really cool. I liked it. It feels like the sort of premise that... I haven't seen the film. I don't know how well it works, but it's like, you know, it works for 4 minutes. I don't know how well that premise is going to work for a full 90 minutes, but maybe they do a great job. I don't recall what the consensus of that film was. My sister saw it. I should probably ask her what she thought of it. But, so that's one of the reasons I like horror anthologies, is not only it increases the chance of actually getting a good story. If you read one story, well, it's either going to be good or bad. But if you read a collection of like 5 stories, odds are one of them is going to be good, right? And you didn't completely waste your time. And also, anthology means it's a collection of shorter stories, which I feel the horror genre particularly takes excellent advantage of. So, yeah, Nightmare World. Here we go. Many anthology movies have a wrapper story. A story that kicks off the small stories that make up the whole anthology. For example, in Tales from the Dark Side, a little boy is trapped in some woman or witch's pantry, and she's going to cook him for dinner. He stalls for time by reading her stories out of a book, and each of these stories are the individual segments of the anthology. A lot of anthologies follow this format. Nightmare World does something kind of interesting in that it kind of has a wrapper, but it's made up of the author's foreword, which says, I'm the author, I wrote the book, and all the stories actually combine into a larger story, like Voltron. And an afterword, which describes the devil pondering how he's going to manipulate things on Earth in order to stick it to God. And I think what they're trying to mean is a lot of these stories that you just read were the devil's manipulation, screwing around to get all the chess pieces in place. There are more volumes of this of Nightmare World, so it probably makes a lot more sense if you keep reading. Like any anthology, especially anthologies that consist of more than like 3 or so episodes, 3 to 5 episodes, like the ABCs of Death is 26 segments. Most of them suck, but there were some gems. This one's 13, and there are a couple good ones. There are a couple that are just okay, and then the rest of them are just, alright. It's a very quick read, because all of the shorts are short. They're only about 8 pages or so, so you can get through it really quickly. probably my favorite is the one that kind of makes no sense in the continuity of a bunch of stories that are supposed to be the devil's manipulation of the cosmic chessboard, so to speak. Well, maybe not exactly, but it does seem a little bit too self-aware. But that's what makes it funny. Basically, you have the last two survivors of a typical slasher movie, like Friday the 13th, running away from the slasher and basically talking about every single horror trope in the book. They're like, why... How come we can't run away from this incredibly slow-moving slasher? The Jason Voorhees type character is moving at a snail's pace. We're running our butts off, and somehow he's still right behind us. How can that be? It's like he's teleporting. They run into... And it goes on like that. And the observations, especially if you're a horror fan, are obvious and have been made before, but it's written well enough to be still funny. They end up finding an abandoned cabin. It's like, well, let's hide there. And they walk in, and it's all a bunch of murder weapons, and that's where all the... well, it's all power tools and knives and crap and pitchforks and chainsaws. And there are a bunch of dead bodies in there. And the guy says, hey, let's have sex, because we're going to die anyway. Why not go out with a... bang. I don't think that was the actual joke. I think I just made that up, which is why it's so lame. So she says, okay, and they start hugging and kissing and stuff, and she says, but there's one thing I should let you know. I was talking to Ashley yesterday, and she said you were a lousy lay. And she pushes him out the door, and where the killer is, and the killer stabs him in the face repeatedly, and she just kind of skedaddles. That one was funny. There's another interesting one where a young convenience store employee goes into the convenience store and says, hey, I couldn't sleep, thought I'd come in for a shift. And then some guy comes in and smacks the manager over the head with a baseball bat and says, my wife left to get cigarettes or ice cream or whatever 30 minutes ago. 30 minutes ago, and she hasn't come back. What have you done with her? And he's like, dude, I just got here. And he's like, thump, thump, thump. Where's my wife? He's like, I don't know. I just got here. Go look at the security tape. If she was here, she'll be on that. So he goes to look at the security tape. And the panel is showing his reaction. He goes, oh my gosh, we've got to get out of here. Get your cell phone and call 911. But he finds the young employee sitting on the ground minus a head. Oh no. And the manager is standing there all demon-y, sharp teeth and stuff, and bites the guy's face off, and then picks up the wife who was stashed behind the counter, behind an aisle or stuff, or something, and says, they will be very interested to know that you have the power to detect us, and then walks off. So a lot of the stories are written like they're a hook into a larger narrative that never comes to pass, at least in this first volume collecting the 13 or so stories. That said, some of the stories are a fun read, especially the slasher film one. Some of them are, you read them and you're like, okay. There's a guy who's following some woman back to her house, obviously cheating on his wife, and she turns out to be a Cthulhu monster. And she's like, you're the chosen one, or something like that, and you're denying your destiny and something, and he hits her on the head with a Cthulhu statue that's sitting on her mantelpiece. And he goes home, and then he shoots his wife in the head because the Cthulhu worshipping demon lady was saying something like, your wife will experience untold eons of pain, or something. So he shoots his wife in the head so that she doesn't, and then he tries to shoot himself, but he can't, and then he screams, and that's the end. And it's like, okay. There's another one where there's this cop, the sitting at a table speaking to someone, and the panels are saying, "I wanted to talk to you, Melissa, and I've loved you the entire time." And he goes on explaining that I know your husband just died, and I actually engineered that whole thing so that we could be together. And then Melissa walks up and says, "Hi, what are you doing? Talking to yourself?" And he says, "Yeah, but I have something I wanted to say to you. Let's take the long way around to the swamp so we can talk." Da da da. Okay, that was kind of obvious that he was not talking to anyone, but okay. The first story is there's a woman and a guy in a canoe. Apparently the big ship sank, and she's pregnant, and they're adrift, and he says, "While you were asleep, I spoke with the water fairies who live in the water, and they sunk the ship because they wanted the soul of our unborn child. But I made a deal with them. I guess they have my soul, and instead of stealing our baby's soul, they'll just look after him forever. But he's tied to this country, which happens to be Ireland." And then he jumps in the water. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the stories I read, and they weren't boring, but they ended with a shrug and okay. But not a bad read. It was a quick read. It appears to be a different artist on each of them, so there's a lot of variety in the way the stories were presented. And a handful of them I really quite enjoyed. So, Nightmare World. Water fairies.